doing it? All right.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians.
That's right, guys. How's it going? So, I just cut my hair. I think it needs a little bit of summer loving. I'm working on that still. I want to do that whole, like, summer pop thing. I think it went a little short. We're going to see what we can do with it. Also, spent way too much time last night watching the new show, The Offer. I don't know if you guys have seen. No, you know that one. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we'll start with that. First off, thank you guys for coming back. Some of you were wondering if I was going to be here today because there wasn't an alert, and there's been a lot going on. So, I just kind of jumped in when I got a bunch of messages from people saying, are you streaming today, Andreas? Are you going to be? I was like, fine. Okay, so thank you again for those of you who've gone to Andreas.me and have liked and subscribed and donated and shared. And by the way, if you haven't thought about this, besides just the thing about me is I've got a bunch of different people that like me for different reasons, and they all hate each other. So there's a bunch of different communities I've found, I guess, founded. If you hate Facebook, you're not going to want to go to APM, which is on Facebook. It's the most inclusive place on the internet, but you might want to go to other community for, the Matrix, or and then of course there's Tartary Nova, and you can get your Discord, Matrix, whatever. So there's like 6 different communities simultaneously existing with each other, and that's pretty cool. Anyway, thanks for your time, and I'd like you to know about this movie and TV show, The Offer. So, The Offer, it took up way too much of my night, and it's pretty sweet so far. There's like 8 episodes. I think there's gonna be 10. It looks like, and it tells the story. It's rather sweet and near to my heart of the California movie scene and what happens when you bring Coppola, a guy who likens himself to a wine-drinking European from Northern California, the Europe of America, right? That's what we would like to think of ourselves as, and how he wants to make this movie isn't because of Francis Ford Coppola. You realize that Francis Ford Coppola eventually got involved, but that wasn't his goal originally. So it was kind of an interesting thing. I've known a lot of this story before, but there's a bunch of parts about the mob that I didn't know, and I thought that was like really interesting. So, and also Robert Evans, which is like this weird kind of hero from LA, from New York City, who ran Paramount Studios for so long. And I think he's an unsung hero of the movie industry. And people think of the movie industry as horribly evil. That might be so. But you think of Robert Evans and what he did and some of the things he came up with, and he's the embodiment of that idea that, he says in the show, even his Matthew Good playing him, that, I started out, were you a religious man? I went to shul with my parents, and I always believed that I was 10 minutes late if I was not more than 10 minutes early, kind of a guy, and didn't believe in any of it. It just kind of felt like a pretend. But then when he got into pretend and started getting into Hollywood, then he went to this movie theater. He snuck out and didn't go to shul one day. And instead of going to church, he went to the movie theater. And then God and magic and religion came alive for him because he was in the temple. And how lucky it was to move on to be not just in the temple, but to be the high priest of this temple, this Paramount temple. And it's an amazing show because so many times along the way, he's fighting against corporations like Jetstream, Western Gulf, who have lots of money, and telling them why it's so important for them to invest in Hollywood and stories. I think people miss how crazy the movie industry was in the 70s, nearly collapsing, and all these people trying to say, hey, we've got these old studios. What are we going to do with these old studios? Now, that's not exactly everyone's cup of tea, but I do think in general, like, it's a pretty amazing show that deserves to be checked out. So you might want to check out The Offer. I'm sure you can find it many places, but there's not a lot out on it yet. I mean, and this guy plays Rudy, who created Hogan's Heroes, and Rudy created Hogan's Heroes. It's worth looking at that. I don't even remember how to spell Hogan's Heroes. Is it regular Hogan? Yeah, it is. It's just Hogan's Heroes. So this show, the guy was. So here's the thing: the show, The Godfather, was created originally. There was a book that was created by Mario Puzo, but it was put in the hands as a low budget production of Ruddy, who had only ever produced this other show, and he'd been working for the Rand Corporation as a military programmer up until it was high security and everything else like that. So it's interesting that The Godfather was created by somebody with high security and, at the Rand Corporation, who said, I just really wanted to leave the Rand Corporation, never mind everything else. And so he comes up with this show first that's called Hogan's Heroes, which is about a concentration camp where Americans aren't really trying to escape because they need to gather information, right? So it's this whole thing, and it was, Jews in Hollywood were like, that's not funny. Nazis aren't funny. But then they thought, this is funny. This could be hilarious because we're making fun of them. Okay. So that show was really popular, but it wasn't what Ruddy really wanted to do, so he stepped off to start trying to work on other films, and he got down to Butch Cassidy's Sundance Kid, Robert Redford, and tried to get him involved in making a motorcycle film, which it was made, but it wasn't highly successful. But he was able to negotiate contracts to get people out of contracts from MGM and into contracts with Paramount. If somebody was trying to work for another studio, and another studio had the rights, they'd say, you just can't make that movie. So Hollywood was a mess. And this guy Ruddy came in and said, I can guarantee that you're going to get out of that lawsuit. I can guarantee that we can trade these characters. And Bob Evans especially. Let's go like that. Robert Evans from Paramount. There you go. He was just, and you got to also, this guy is just, this is him at 80. You know what I mean? This is how classy this dude, just completely out of control. Fancy looking monster right there. Kept himself going. And it wasn't just drugs. And it wasn't just, I don't even want to get into it. But, Bob Evans, interesting guy. So, yeah, you should definitely check him out. And the other thing was, The Godfather nearly didn't get made because The Godfather was going to offend Italians. And they thought, okay, we do not need this we don't need this Colombo didn't need this American civil the Italian American Civil Rights League was created by Joseph Colombo in order to fight against the images of the mafia and saying, oh gosh, Italians are the mafia and this is this terrible thing that we got to stop projecting, and that the FBI is really just picking on Italian Americans because there are plenty of people in America that are working together. Why are we deciding that Italian Americans are all of a sudden a mob instead of Irish Americans or Jewish Americans? And you know why? Because there's an Irish American League, there's a Jewish American League, there's an African American League, the NAACP. And so Joseph Colombo decided to start an Italian American Civil Rights League to defend the image of the Italians. Now, the only thing that was kind of ironic about this was that Joseph Colombo was also called, Colombo Joe or Big Colombo or Capo of the Cosa Nostra, because he was in charge of one of the families, the Colombo family, of the 5 families of the American Mafia. And so for him to say we shouldn't talk about the Mafia because it doesn't exist, and then him being in the mob was a little ironic, but again, good and evil in the garden here. What are you going to do? Point is, he single-handedly stopped The Godfather from getting made. I would say not quite single-handedly because Frank Sinatra was also very offended because the Fontaine character was clearly based on him, he thought, because he's a narcissist. When really it was based on an amalgamation of a number of different characters, probably more like Dino, right? Like Dino, but he was such a narcissist, he thought it had to be Frank Sinatra. So it's we got to turn off this horrible thing. They tried to get Colombo to help him do it. But eventually, Ruddy went and convinced Joe Colombo that, this movie, The Godfather, wasn't about the mafia. In fact, they made sure never to use the word. They took it out. There's only going to be one use of it, and they just cut it out. Because it was going to be somebody saying he's a mobster. It was going to be an accusation at him. And then the guys, because they would never refer to themselves as this, right? So it's very interesting. He was able to convince Colombo that he was going to make this movie about America and about the dirty underbelly of corruption in the system and how the Italian-American family is beautiful and connecting to Shakespeare and all this other stuff. So Ruddy really saved the Godfather project in every respect. Simultaneously, there was no screenplay. Mario Puzo had to get someone to help him write it, and that's how you get Francis Ford Coppola, because he sits there with him and works through the whole book with him into a movie, into a screenplay. So all of these things were well documented in the film. The main thing that was interesting was by getting the mob involved, they were able to make the film in New York, and all these places opened up, and anybody who said that they weren't going to make this movie, they could make them make this movie. And when they needed a horse head that looked real, well, the mob got them a horse head that looked very real because it was a horse head. So The Offer, I'm gonna leave it at that. I just think you guys should look into that. It's a great thing. Theories of Alexander and the Quran. We're gonna get into that. I'm gonna start with the Saint Sazoi, Christian monk, deserted mourning over the tomb of Alexander the Great first. But let's see if there's any news out there. Which there almost never is. News doesn't exist. Let's be real. Amber Heard. I think we're done with that finally. Tulsa gunman targeted doctor he blamed for pain after surgery. What are you going to do? Russian mercenaries help soldiers in Mali massacre hundreds of civilians. Okay, I'm interested. Zelensky on war, future technology, Wired magazine, sure. Okay. Okay. Russian mercenaries help soldiers in Mali massacre hundreds of civilians, witnesses say. No, come on, go back. Sensitive material, that's why we're looking at it. Okay. Russian NY Times. Is there anybody who's not a complete... Well, yeah, like, it's a little annoying. What's it going on with that? The killings didn't stop in Mali, a massacre with Russian footprint. These blasts, too accurate for sand people. Clearly the mark of imperial droids. Okay. Stormtroopers are only so precise. Bamako, Mali, on the last Sunday in March before Ramadan, thousands of merchants and villagers filled the market of Mora in the central Mali, trading cattle in a vast pen and stock up on spices and vegetables in the town's sandy alleys. Suddenly, five low-flying helicopters thrummed overhead, some firing weapons and drawing gunfire in the village. In return, villagers ran for their lives, but there was nowhere to escape. The helicopters were dropping soldiers on the town's outskirts to block all exits. The soldiers were in pursuit of Islamist militants who had been operating in the region for years. Many of the soldiers were Malians, but they were accompanied by white foreigners wearing military fatigues and speaking a language that was neither English nor French, locals said. The foreigners, according to the diplomats, officials, and human rights groups, belonged to the Russian paramilitary group known as Wagner. Okay. Russian paramilitary group Wagner. Let's see what we got on that. Known as PMC. Ooh. Well, that almost looks Azovian. The Wagner private military company, Chevik Wagner, is a Russian paramilitary organization variously described as a private military company, a network of mercenaries, or a de facto private arm of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The various elements of Wagner have also been linked to white supremacist neo-Nazi party. Okay, well, come on, everything is these days. The Wagner group came to global prominence during the war in Donbass in Ukraine, where it aided separatist forces of the self-declared Donetsk and the Luhansk People's Republic from 2014 to 2015. Its contractors have reportedly taken part in various conflicts around the world, including the civil wars in Syria, Libya, and the Central African Republic, CAR, and Mali, often fighting on the side of forces aligned with the Russian government. Though welcomed by some allied factions such as the government of Syria and SAR, the Wagner operatives have been accused of war crimes in areas where they've been deployed. The accusations include rapes and robberies of civilians, and at one point a video was published of Wagner PMCs torturing an accused deserter. Okay, well, that kind of gives you an idea. Oh, wait. It has most recently been tied to the Russian invasion of Ukraine 22, where it's been reportedly deployed to assassinate Ukrainian leaders. Well, Rusik unit founders Alexei Michalkov and Jan Petrovsky giving American Jared Taylor, a Culverite. Is he really though? Like, I don't know him. I have no context. New Century Foundation. I mean, is he self-described? Does he describe himself as this? This is the thing. Like, when people don't describe themselves as something and Wikipedia describes them as something, it's like, isn't that more of a diagnosis, really, than a description? Attended Yale, lived in West Africa, improving Francophone regions under the continent, described as all this stuff. I don't know. I'm suspicious of all this crap. So, over the next 5 days, in more Malian soldiers and their Russian allies looted houses. So here's your story. I don't know. Anything in the New York Times is like categorically gonna be an untruth, right? Because if it comes out of their mouths, you know, because it's the New York Times and they are liars. But at the same time, good luck to them telling a story. And if there's anything here true, good for them. So here's the deal. They think that there's a Russian paramilitary group that's killing a bunch of people in Mali. I'm not saying they aren't. Just be open-minded. So also, Based AF Mondays. I hope you guys saw the last Based AF Monday because we talked a lot about the school shooting, this most recent one. I also just recently watched the South Park where Sharon's going through menopause. By the way, there's a new Obi-Wan and a new South Park as well. There's a new South Park streaming special that I'm going to check out later. But I saw the old South Park where the school shooting is too exciting to Sharon, and they worry, is she going through menopause? Because why is she so worried about a silly school shooting? So that's something I think would be worth watching again, because I hadn't really thought about what's going on in the background, because no one at the school dies, but there's a bunch of crisis actors. So it's an interesting episode that I hadn't really considered. Anyway, future of Ukraine. The Wire is telling you that these modified drones and the cost of war and et cetera, like what's going to really happen with technology. So I don't really care. The other thing is you can always get Panda, use Panda, and you can go through pretty interesting news here as well. There's I use Panda to digest media news sometimes, so there's that. Okay, so Alexander the Great in the Quran. Let's just do it. Why Saint Sizoi, the Christian desert monk, is depicted mourning over the tomb of Alexander the Great. The saint of the Orthodox Christian Church, the hermit desert monk Sizoi. Oh, let's make sure you can see the picture. That might help. The Sizoi has been depicted for hundreds of years in hagiographies over the open tomb of Alexander the Great. But for why? Saint Sizoi is an enigma for both classical and Byzantine archaeologists, specialist scholars trying to interpret the symbolism of the relevant hagiographies, the first of which date back to the 14th century AD. Also answer convincingly the question, did Saint Cyzios really saw the tomb of Alexander the Great? Do robots write this? The existence of Saint Sizoi was pointed out by Mr. Satoris Athanaselis, professor of toxicology at the medical school of the University of Athens. Okay. Specifically, Mr. Athanaselis, in his extensive letter entitled "The Tomb of Alexander the Great" in Christian hagiography, writes, "From my first visit to this amazing hagiographed church, I was struck by a mural hagiography of Saint Sizoi, who is located in front of the open tomb of Alexander the Great." Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff here, but what we're getting into is the idea that they found this idea that a saint saw Alexander the Great, that Alexander the Great is connected to Christianity or to Islam, and that's what we're going to get into today. Because Turks, right? Turks loving this statue. Greeks and Turks. Okay, what do they have to do with this guy? And he found this tomb. He wondered if he was a monk. Importance to the Agionis Lonus theologian of monastery of Panagia. Okay, we'll skip ahead though. So here's the thing, and just to give you just a little bit to think about though. Here's your pictures, constantly, just pictures of Sizoi discovering Alexander the Great. Okay, so there's that. Now the other thing we're going to really quickly bring up before I get into the Muslim aspect of this all, Croatia. So if you look at Croatia, which by the way I think is my shirt still on sale, because if you can Get yourself a shirt for one. Here's your chance, man. You got one more day to get yourself a Croatia shirt for $14. Whoever was saying it was too expensive. Well, it'll be more expensive. So here's your chance. Get yourself your Croatia shirt. Get out there and party. Okay. Andreas.me/store. So Croatia, important country. Hrvatska, the way they really call it. It's actually a few places, and you can, it's one location today because of how small the world is, but Dalmatia is not the same as Split, for instance, or something like that. And a lot of people that came from this coastal region ended up Janissaries, which we were discussing before, which is a group of Islamicized soldiers from Christian regions, but also ended up being just boatsmen. And you can hear the story of Captain Cook, right? Captain Cook. And Captain Cook, he was not Croatian, but his first mate was Croatian. So if you were to go to look into Captain Cook, you'd find out like Captain Cook, Hawaii, right? That's the first thing that comes up. And everyone thinks about Hawaii and the culture of Hawaii and how ancient culture of Hawaii is, right? And that song, there's that great song, Aloha Oi. Aloha Oi. Okay. But here's the brutal truth about this. These guys wrote it. All right. So you go to Wikipedia, written in 1878, which is not ancient times, by Lily. Wait. The Princess of Hawaii wrote this song. Well, let's get down a little bit further, shall we? And we'll look it up and see if this is true at all. Okay. Because musicology. Are they gonna just where is it gonna be obvious? Are they gonna say it ever? There we go. Musicology. Parts of Aloha Oi resemble the song Lone Rock by the Sea and the chorus of George Frederick Root's 1854 song The Music in the Air. The Lone Rock by the Sea, mentioned by Charles Winston, published by Charles Crozat, right? Crozat Converse in 1857, and itself derives from a Croatian Serbian folk song, Sedi Mara na kamen studentso. Mary is sitting on a stone well. The Aloha Oi chorus melody was also used as a counterpoint to the chorus of the jazz song Hula. Okay, my point being, when you get down to it, the song itself derives from a Croatian song. And they want to say that it had to do with Charles Wilson, but I don't know if that's right. Let me see here. Aloha Oi. Aloha Oi. Captain Croatia. Because somebody has a better... It's his first mate, right? Croatian. I could find it at some point. Whatever. Point is, you can get into some of these characters connected to James Cook. James Cook's first mate was Croatian, and he played music on the boat. And this is a big connection to why Hawaiian culture has been sort of created to have Slavic music as its main melody, and some of the stories have to do with these primitive, like Hawaiian paganism. Is that going to come up? Can you do that? Hawaiian religion. Sorry. Okay, so Hawaiian religion in the Kapu system, you got these totems, same as you have in Asia and Persia and Tartaria. The same totems you have in Pacific Northwest. But you have this idea of gods, godhead figures, fertility statues. I mean, this is not as Hellenistic as it is Slavic and mythological. So the Slavic religion is kind of superimposed on Polynesianism. More recently, by the way, because so much of this was done in the last few centuries, Hawaii was essentially designed because it needed an excuse to own the island. And they said, well, there's a culture here, and we can rise up and we can create it. Okay. I don't want to focus too much on Aloha Oi. It actually connects into a bigger part of the story, but you can see examples of ziggurat, towers and everything that connects this idea of and again, these are the modern Hawaiians, right? And you can see how this guy, this lady, like here's what's left of Hawaii because of what they've done to the Hawaiian culture. And this guy is supposed to say, oh yeah, I'm a Hawaiian, but he's more like this weird, like California, Pacific Northwest, probably originally from Connecticut looking hippie. So anyway, then we can also really quickly get into, where did I put the article? Oh, it's all the way over here. Dang. Was that whole window closed the whole time? That's horrible. I think so. I think you might have missed all of that. That's possible. Wow. Okay, well, wait. Was that gone? Dang. Aloha Oi. Can you see this now? Okay. Aloha Oi. So Aloha Oi, this is the Aloha Oi song that we're supposed to have thought came from 1878. And as you look into it, again, this is written by a princess. I'm sorry, I just accidentally had the wrong window open. So I want to make sure you see this. But when you get down to it and you type Croatia, you'll see it came from a Croatian Serbian folk song called City Mara, which is where the anthem for Hawaii comes from. So the Croatian song City Mara, which is Mary sitting on a stone well, ended up that's how the song became popular. It was originally sung with an Akavian accent, and there's examples of Captain Cook's crew being Croatian. Now, theories about Alexander the Great and Quran. This is why I wanted to bring this up, because we saw earlier these pictures, and you can see the connection between Slavs and Turks, and going around the world on islands, and Alexander the Great, who supposedly went all over the place, right? So the story of Jul Karnan in the Quran, which is called the Two-Horned One, is transliterated Zul Karnan or Zulkarnain is mentioned in the Quran. And here's a picture of Alexander the Great, just to remind you, he loved to go by the horned guy, right? He was the horned guy. And you can look up Zeus Ammon, which is his god, which we talked about before. Let's see if this looks right. But you can, I spelled it wrong, but whatever. Here you go. Horned Moses, horned Zeus, horned Alexander. So Alexander traveled to the ends of the world to build a wall in the Caucasus Mountains, and this is another thing that people don't seem to talk about, is the Alexandrian gates. I mean, people talk about the Alexandrian gates, but this is a more, we don't have a story about the Great Wall of China, but we do have the Great Wall of Tartary in the Caucasus, the gates of Alexander. So something to consider is that the Great Wall of China story, that we don't have. Like, we do have stories. It's just that they're about a wall that's further north that we always associate with the gates of the Caucasus, the Alexandrian gates, the greats of Alexander, the Great Walls of Alexander. However you want to look at that. Important stuff to know about. Okay. And you can see for a long time, Great Wall of Gorgon is a Sasanian defense system. Great Wall of China, which is not mentioned by the Cathay. A lot of people have been arguing about the idea. What if Gorgon, Rage, Dario Debit, and even Spain, right, in the Cordoba Caliphate, were all part of some crazy long wall that existed forever? Well, maybe. But what we do know is there are gates. There are places where there's huge walls and there's areas where there isn't, and that makes enough sense that you would not build a wall all the way across the world, because there's natural environmental borders. Okay. So the difference is, according to the legends, Alexander traveled to the ends of the world, then built a wall in the Caucasus Mountains to keep Gog and Magog out of civilized lands, which are these giant characters from the Bible and the Quran. Gog and Magog, people being walled off by Alexander's forces. Okay. The Hebrew Bible and the Quran, Gog is an individual, Magog is his land. Okay. Magog is a man, and in Genesis 10, Magog is a man and eponymous ancestor of a nation, but no Gog is mentioned by the time of Revelation 20. So maybe there are people from Gog and Magog. Maybe that's more to do with the land than the people itself, but it's often associated with Vikings, Huns, Khazars, Mongols, Turanians, or other nomads in the Middle Ages, or even the 10 lost tribes of Israel, right? So isn't that kind of your sign? And so the idea is that the Gog and Magog walls were to keep out the ancient world, and this new world was going to be built. Devil, Gog, and Magog attacked the holy city, right? And this is from 17th century Russian manuscript. So to get another idea about who's considered these stories, 16th century Persian manuscript, which is we looked at earlier, and then the monster of Gog and Magog from the Quran. So this story just comes up over and over again, and this is the idea that Alexander fought them off by building the Great Walls. And then these stories even show up in our Flavius Josephus books of history. So several argue that the form of this narrative is in Syriac. Alexander legend, known as the Nishana, dates back to 629 and 636 CE, Common Era, Anno Domini, after Christ. And so not the source for the Quranic narrative, based on the view held by many Western and Muslim scholars that the Surah 18 belongs to the Second Meccan period, 615 to 619. The Syriac legend of Alexander has, however, received a range of dates by different scholars, from a latest date of 630 to closer to Muhammad's death. Okay, so the idea that this might have had oral composition before that made its way into the Quran, and that the recollection of the Islamic milieu, the majority of modern researchers of the Quranic as well as the Islamic commentators identify Julkarnain as Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was an immensely popular figure in classical and post-classical cultures. Early Greek manuscripts for Alexander's romance survive into the 3rd century. Hellenism, all-powerful gods show favor to such an unrighteous ruler. The theological need plus acculturation to Hellenism led to a more positive Jewish interpretation of the Alexander legacy. In its most neutral form, this was typified by having Alexander show deference to either the Jewish people or the symbols of their faith, and having the great conqueror thus acknowledge the essential truth of the Jews' religion. Intellectual or ethical traditions, the prestige of Alexander was harnessed to the cause of the Jewish ethnocentrism. Even Jewish writers would almost completely co-opt Alexander, depicting him as a righteous Gentile, or even as a believing monotheist. Christianized people of the Near East, inheritors of both the Hellenic and as well as Judaic strands of the Alexander romance, further theologized Alexander until in some stories he was depicted even as a saint. Okay, and that's what we were pointing out here, is that Alexander and what he does to unite the Semitic world, which is again spread out into China, and Jews in China, which we did before, but I'll just point out, and then Jews in Alexandria. The connections here between the Jews that were the Mizrahi, the Ashkenazi, and I always forget the Kaifeng Jews. There's just connection between Islam and Judaism in China, and being so much of the time they're up against people that are polytheistic and believing in multiple gods or duats. So Alexander sticks out because he's unifying the gods of these people together, and more he's allowing them to run the society. So Alexander is allowing for both their religion to take over, even though he's creating his own. He has his own ideas about what religion should exist, because it's kind of a free society. Semitic Islam, Judaism, Christianity, whatever you really want to describe, are starting to, the ideas that are going to exist later are forming in Alexandria 300 years earlier. And as time goes on, that leads to him, because he's accepted this and let it happen, being considered not just a saint, but also almost a prophet in the Quran. So let me see here. Is this the right tab? Okay. Since the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, there's been no age in history, whether in the West or the East, in which his name and exploits have not been familiar. Datings and origins of the Alexander legend. Let me go back. Syriac version of the legend, Land of Darkness. Okay. Concentrates on Alexander's journey to the end of the world, where he constructs the gates of Alexander to enclose the evil nations of Gog and Magog, while the metrical homily describes his journey to the Land of Darkness to discover the water of life in the Fountain of Youth, as well as his enclosure of Gog and Magog. These legends concerning Alexander are remarkably similar to the story of Julkarnain found in the Quran. So the idea of him finding the Fountain of Youth, which we've associated Ponce de Leon in Florida, by the way. Syriac legends have been generally dated to between 629 AD and 636. There is a legend of an ex-eventu knowledge of the Khazar invasion of Armenia in 629. Let me see here. One scholar who finds striking similarities between the Quranic verses 1883 and 102 and the Syriac legends in support of Emperor Heraclius date the works to 629-30. I mean, these are just a bunch of, how old is this story thing. But the point is that it doesn't matter, because the way the Quran interprets it shows that there's a number of people telling the same story at the same time. And of course, his name gets a bit confused, and so Alexander X might become, Ch, or Alchin and Q, and Khan, Shan, Kogan. We're back to that. So the two-horned one literally translates the Arabian phrase Dul Karnan, as written in the Quran, is the two-horned man. Alexander the Great was portrayed in his own time with horns following the iconography of the Egyptian god Amun-Ra, who held the position of transcendental self-created creator deity par excellence. Rams were a symbol of virility due to their rutting behavior. The horns of Amun may have also represented the east and the west of the earth, and one of the titles of Amun was the two-horned. Alexander was depicted with the horns of Amun as a result of his conquest of ancient Egypt in 332 BC, where the priesthood received him as a son of the god Amun. He was identified by the ancient Greeks with Zeus, the king of the gods. The combined deity Zeus Amun was a distinct figure in the ancient Greek mythology, according to 5 historians of antiquity: Arrian, Curtis, Diodorus, Justin, and Plutarch. Alexander visited the oracle of Amun at Siwa in the Libyan desert, and rumors spread that the oracle had revealed Alexander's father to be the deity Amun rather than Philip. Alexander is said by some to have been convinced of his own divinity. He seems to have been convinced of the reality of his own divinity, and to have required its acceptance by others. The cities perforce complied, but often ironically. The Spartan decree read, "Since Alexander wishes to be a god, let him be a god." All right, so this went on until the humanization period, when they started saying, well, at least he was a saint. He's a pretty good guy. Maybe he wasn't a god, but he was great. Okay, so that's a bit about that. Alexander's Wall, mentioned in the Quran. See, Marco Polo doesn't talk about the Great Wall of China, but it does talk about the Wall of Alexander. The buildings of the gates in the Caucasus Mountains by Alexander to repel the barbarian peoples identified with Gog and Magog has ancient provenance, and the wall is known as the Gates of Alexander, or the Caspian Gates. The name Caspian Gates originally applies to the narrow region to the southeast corner of the Caspian Sea, through which Alexander actually marched in pursuit of Bessius in 329 BC, although he did not stop to fortify it. It was transferred to the passes through the Caucasus on the other side of the Caspian by the more fanciful historians of Alexander. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus mentioned that a nation of Alans, who we had previously mentioned elsewhere as being Scythian, traveled through a passage which King Alexander the Great shut up with iron gates. Josephus also records that the people of Magog, the Maganites, were synonymous with the Scythians. According to Andrew Rooney Anderson, this merely indicates that the main elements of the story were already in place 6 centuries before the Quran's revelation, not that the story itself was known in cohesive form before apparent in the Quranic account. Similarly, St. Jerome, in his letter 77, mentions that the hordes of the Huns had poured forth all the way through Meotis. They had their haunts between icy Tanais and the rude Massagette, where the gates of Alexander kept back to the wild people of the Caucasus. In his commentary on Ezekiel 38:2, Jerome identifies the nation located beyond the Caucasus Mountains and near Lake Meotis as Gog and Magog. Thus, the gates of Alexander the Great. The Gates of Alexander legend was combined with the legends of Gog and Magog from the Book of Revelation. It has been suggested that the incorporation of Gog and Magog legend into the Alexander romance was prompted by the invasion of the Huns across the Caucasus Mountains in 395 AD into Armenia and Syria. So, in terms of Christian legends, same thing though, really. And here's a wall of the citadel of Durban in Russia, which has been also identified with the Gates of Alexander as well. The Caliph Umar, as well as by later caliphs, sent expeditions to Durban to seek out this wall. So Muslims were aware of this as well. Here's a rendition of Homer's view of the world prior to 900 BC. Well, that's just great. Let's save that for later. little snow globe with a giant tree, flat earth looking thing. Great. Okay, Alexander travels across Arabia and into Europe. More Arab literature, kind of proving this point. Let me see here. Anything else I wanted to grab on this? Prophecy of the Khazar invasion. In the Christian Alexander Romance literature, Gog and Magog were sometimes associated with the Khazars, a Turkic people who lived near the Caspian Sea. The invasion of the Khazars around 627 CE appears in the Syriac Christian legend as an ex eventu prophecy involving the Huns, including Gog and Magog, passing through the gate and destroying the land, which gives the terminus pos quem of 628 CE for its final redaction. In his 9th century work Expositio in Mattheum Evangelistum, the Benedictine monk Christian of Stavelot refers to the Khazars as Hunnic, describing of Hunnic descendants of Gog and Magog, and saying that they were circumcised and observing all the laws of Judaism. The Khazars were a Central Asian people with a long association with Judaism. A Georgian tradition echoed in a chronicle also identified the Khazars with Gog and Magog, stating that they are wild men with hideous faces and the manners of wild beasts, eaters of blood. Okay, well, that's not very Levitican. Early Muslim scholars wrote about Jul Karnan as associated Gog and Magog with the also associated Gog and Magog with the Khazars. Ibn Kathir, the famous commentator of the Quran, identified Gog and Magog with the Khazars who lived between the Black and Caspian Sea in his work Al-Bidiyah wa al-Ninya, the beginning of the end. The Muslim explorer Ahmad ibn Fadlan, in his travelogue regarding his diplomatic missions in 921 AD to the Volga Bulgars, a vassal of the Khazarian Empire, noted that the beliefs about Gog and Magog being the ancestors of the Khazars. Thus, Muslim scholars associate the Khazars with Jul Karnan, just as Christian legends associate the Khazars with Alexander the Great. The rising place of the sun, Alexandrian legends. Okay, well, this kind of almost worth mentioning because it does describe the shape of the world in the Quran as flat, and in this world as well. Let's see. The rising place of the sun, the setting place of the sun, where he saw the sun sets in a murkier, boiling spring of water or mud. Jul Karnan also finds a people living by the rising place of the sun and finds out that these people somehow have no shelter. In his commentary of the Quran, Ibn Kathir explains the verse in verse 1889, referring to the furthest point that he could from traveling, that he could be traveled west, until when he reached the setting place of the sun. He followed a route until he reached the furthest point that could be reached in the direction of the sun's setting, which is the west of the earth. As for the idea of his reaching the place in the sky where the sun sets, this is something impossible. And the tales told by storytellers that he had traveled so far to the west that the sun set behind him are not true at all. Most of these stories come from the myths of people of the books, Jews and Christians, and the fabrications and the lies of the heretics. In this commentary, Ibn Kathir differentiates between the end of the world, the end of the earth, and the supposed place in the sky where the sun sets, the resting place of the sun. Ibn Kathir contends that the Jul Karnan did reach the farthest place that could be traveled west, but not the resting place of the sun. And he goes on to mention that the people of the book, which I guess is an Islamic term that refers to Christians, Jews, Sabians, and Zoroastrians. Okay, I'll look at that later. Tells myths about the Jul Karnan traveling so far beyond the end of the world, the earth, that the sun was behind him. This shows that Ibn Kathir was aware of the Christian legends, and it suggests that Ibn Kathir considered Christian myths about Alexander to be referring to the same figures as Jul Karnan mentioned in the Quran. Interesting here, the Persian lack of the pronunciation of R, Kuan, right? A similar theme is elaborated upon several places in the Islamic Hadith literature in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. It is narrated that the Messenger of Allah one day said, "Do you know where the sun goes?" They replied, "Allah, and his apostle knows best." He, the Holy Prophet, observed, "Verily the sun glides till it reaches its place under the throne of Allah. Then it falls prostrate and remains there until it is asked to rise up and go to the place whence it came. And it goes back and continues emerging out from its rising place. Okay, so the setting place of the sun also commented on by Al-Tabari and Al-Kuturbi and the like of Ibn Kathir. They show some reservations towards the literal idea of the sun setting in a muddy spring, but held to the basic theme of Jul Kanan reaching the ends of the earth. That the earth must be spherical was known since at least the time of Pythagoras, but this knowledge did not reach ancient folklore such as Alexander's romance, where Alexander travels to the ends of the flat earth. I don't know, man. I mean, come on. Wikipedia, you're embarrassing yourself. It is notable that unlike the Babylonian Greeks and Indians, the pre-Islamic Arabs had no scientific astronomy. Okay, again, also not true. But we'll prove that later that that's a lie. Their knowledge of astronomy was limited to measuring time based on empirical observations of the rising and setting of the sun, moons, and particular stars. The area of astronomical study was known as Anwa and continued to be developed after Islamatization by the Arabs. Astronomy in the medieval Islam began in the 8th century, and the first major Muslim works of astronomy was Zil al-Sindi, written in 830 by al-Khwarizmi. The work is significant as it was introduced the Ptolemaic system into Islamic scientists. The Ptolemaic system was ultimately replaced by the Copernican system during the scientific revolution in Europe. Okay, well, just to unpack a little bit of all that. So, Pythagoras, Copernicus, Islamicization by Arabs, scientific revolution, all of their stories saying that the world parks its sun in the mud. Interesting stuff. Okay. So the whole camp mounted. Alexander and his troops went up between the fetid sea and the bright sea to the place where the sun enters the window of heaven, for the sun is the servant of the Lord, and neither by night nor by day does he cease from his traveling. The place of the rising is over the sea, and the people who dwell there, when he is about to rise, flee away and hide themselves in the sea, and they be not burnt by his rays. And he passes through the midst of the heavens in the place where he enters the window of heaven, and wherever he passes there are terrible mountains, and those who dwell there have caves hollowed out by the rocks. And as soon as they see the sun passing over them, men and birds flee away from before him and hide in the caves. For the rocks are rent by his blazing heat and fall down, and whether they be men or beasts, as soon as the stones touch them, they are consumed. And when the sun enters the window of heaven, he straightway bows down and makes obeisance before God, his creator. I like that word, but I don't know it, I'll admit. And he travels and descends the whole night through the heavens until at length he finds himself where he rises. Okay, obeisance. Is that how you spell that? A gesture of moving the body, such as a curtsy, that expresses deference or homage. Obeisance. It's like obeisance. I like it. I'll use that word more often. I'm going to just, present a little bit of obeisancy. The Christian legend is much more detailed than the Quran's version and elaborates at length about the cosmology of Earth that is implied in the story. Alexander says to them, the nobles, "This thought has arisen in my mind, and I am wondering what is the extent of the earth, and how high the heavens are." Such a curious guy. And upon what the heavens are fixed, and now this I desire to go and see, upon what the heavens rest, and what surrounds all creation. The nobles answered and said to the king, "As to the thing, my lord, which the majesty desires to go and see, namely, upon the heavens rest, what the heavens rest, and what surrounds the earth, and the terrible seas which surround the world, will not give thee a passage, because there are 11 bright seas, on which the ships of men sail, and beyond these is about 10 miles of dry land, and beyond these 10 miles there is the foetid sea, the Okeanos, the ocean, which surrounds all creation. Men are not able to come near this foetid sea. Okay. Its waters are like poisons, and if men swim there, they will die at once. Okay, so this is interesting because is it really not that much. It's exactly what we're told. It's called polar projection map. I mean, you do that and immediately, or what's it like? UN map. You can, that the idea of the ice wall, right? That's literally what they just told you. That same story. Also, what the heck is this? Spiral projected Scandinavian map? What the heck? 1960 Scandinavian map. I want this. I want this poster. That might be like literally what the world really is. This is the closest thing I've seen to an actual map of the world. Just this swirling mass of nonsense. I agree with this. It speaks to me. Saving that for later. All right. Well, so Christian legend is much more detailed than the Quran's version. The ocean opens up. We heard descriptions of the ice wall and the greater sea, the space sea that surrounds us afterwards. And it's a motif of the Epic of Gilgamesh. So there's just continual reusing of these ideas, but it makes you think, hey, maybe these are real. Because why are we describing the most ancient Babylonian myths, but being about Alexander? Similar to the Davy Crockett story. It makes me wonder if Davy Crockett's just Alexander, right? I mean, like half of those myths were probably just applied from Alexander or something. Islamic depictions of Alexander the Great. He was written, same thing. You get the same stories. He united Europe and united the Arabs and brought back the Iranian Empire because he brought back taxing people to have a stable empire. Andalusian, New Persian is what it is. Okay. Well, the other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was I did some videos a while ago where we talked about military. There's something I wanted to show you. It's like a lot shorter clip than I've been showing you before. But it had to do with the Q8 projects and how we've moved away in the United States military from violent weapons because after JFK and Bobby K and Martin Luther King and everything, you saw they're like, well, we have to stop assassinations because assassinations are bothering people. So they moved into using non-violent drugs that like drove people crazy. So I wanted to see if I could find that and show you.
This is a report on 3 chemical munition systems currently under development by the United States Army. The E-8 35mm multiple tube cartridge launcher, the E-158 aerial cluster, and the E-159 aerial cluster. Here at Fort Campbell, Kentucky in 1963, Troop Test Water Bucket 1 indicated that Riot Control Agent CS was a potentially effective tactical weapon that could be employed both offensively and defensively. As a result of the Fort Campbell tests, Army researchers at Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, designed the E-8, the E-158, and the E-159 munition systems as vehicles for delivering Agent CS to the target. The E-8 system is a man-portable, expendable launcher consisting of 16 tubes encased in a plastic carrier. Each tube holds 4 cartridges filled with 40 grams of pyrotechnic mix and 16 grams of Agent CS, a total of 64 cartridges. The E-8 munition system can be fired either manually or electrically, from a ground emplacement or from a vehicle. Elevations of 25 to 90 degrees provide for ranges of 30 to 250 meters. Lateral distribution is achieved by the arrangement of the launch tubes. At maximum range and under optimum meteorological conditions, the E-8 will blanket an area 30 meters wide and 150 meters long with a cloud of CS in approximately 25 seconds. The E-158 system is a munition designed for helicopter delivery to the target. It consists of 8 modules, each containing 33 CS pyrotechnic mix-filled canisters. The E-158 munition is hand-tossed from the aircraft, traveling at speeds up to 300 knots. The E-159 system consists of two 158s connected by a strong back assembly. It is designed for delivery to the target area on brackets suspended beneath the wing of the aircraft. The canisters contained in both the E-158 and the E-159 systems are fired in much the same manner as the cartridges in the E-8 system. The individual canisters are ejected from the cluster by the ignition of a propellant charge. Then, after a 4 to 6 second delay, the CS pyrotechnic mix compound is ignited, causing emission of the CS agent. In December 1965, Troop Test Water Bucket 2 was conducted at Camp A.P. Hill, Virginia, to test the effectiveness of the E-8, E-158, and E-159 systems in a series of simulated tactical situations. What you are about to see are actual film clips of those tests. The objective of this first test was to determine the ability of the E-158 cluster system to prevent a potential ambush through reconnaissance by fire, as well as to determine the effects of Agent CS on both masked and unmasked troops. The hostile force was made up of a group of two-man teams, with one man masked and the other unmasked. A masked evaluator was assigned to each team. Hostiles were considered to be effective as long as they could continue to operate their weapons. But when overcome by the agent, unmasked personnel were helped from the contaminated area by their masked buddies. Following each test, the participants, both friendly and hostile, masked and unmasked, were interrogated concerning their reactions to the agent and their abilities to function properly and to identify members of the opposing forces. Evaluators also recorded such vital data as cloud dimensions and stability, the time required for cloud buildup, and pertinent information concerning the weapons functioning. Troops equipped with protective masks were able to move through the target area before the agent cloud had dissipated. The objective of the next test was to evaluate the effectiveness of the systems in enabling masked friendly troops to occupy a village with minimum hazard to non-combatants and friendly troops. Hostile troops were not masked. Some occupied tunnels and underground chambers. Although only one of the delivery systems, an E-159 cluster, placed the munition on target, 85% of the target was covered. The majority of the hostile force was incapacitated. Seepage of the agent into the shallow, unsealed tunnels forced unmasked hostiles into the open. This test, more than others, pointed up the need for more accurate bombing techniques and training for use of the E-158 and E-159. It also demonstrated that when they land in dry grass or thatch, the submunitions tend to act as incendiaries. Studies are currently underway in an effort to alleviate these limitations. Another test objective was to evaluate the effectiveness of the E-158 and E-159 systems in countering an ambush of a helicopter landing zone during air mobile operations. Although the majority of the hostile force was made tactically ineffective, wind-blown fire in the area occupied by the ambushing force resulted in termination of the test before the arrival of the unmasked assault force. The fire was caused by the burning submunitions. The results of this test were deemed inconclusive. Another test in this series confirmed that the E-8 launcher is an effective munition system for use in the daylight ambush of a hostile foot column. When hostile troops reached a predetermined killing zone, friendly defending forces initiated an ambush with heavy fire. M60 machine guns emplaced at the front and rear of the killing zone cut off the avenues of escape. Upon initiation of the ambush, 2 E-8 systems were fired, one at the front and one at the rear of the killing zone, so that their fields of fire overlapped. The entire killing zone was blanketed by the cloud of Agent CS. Although the hostiles attempted to charge through the agent cloud, they were overcome by the agent before they were able to reach safety. All were declared incapacitated or tactically ineffective. Another objective of the test series was to evaluate the E-8 as an effective weapon for daylight defense of a fixed installation. As the hostile force began its assault from the woods, approximately 150 meters from the base complex, the defending force opened fire with small arms and 3 E-8 launchers. The attacking force had scarcely left its concealed positions in the woods when it was showered with cartridges from the E-8 and was enveloped in the CS cloud they created. The test confirmed that the E-8 munition system can be used to defeat or effectively impede an assault by unmasked hostiles. The majority of the assault force was judged to have been incapacitated or made tactically ineffective. The purpose of the next test was to determine the effectiveness of the E-8 system against an ambush of a friendly foot column and to determine how well friendly forces, initially unmasked, can exploit the effects of E-8 for counter-ambush. Although nearly a minute was required to set up the E-8 system in this test, experience has shown that with sufficient training, a man can emplace and fire the system in approximately 15 seconds. Another 15 seconds is required for the system to fire completely and for the agent cloud to build up and incapacitate the enemy sufficiently enough for the assault troops to move in for the kill. Some hostiles resorted to holding gloves, towels, and similar items over their faces in an effort to ward off the effects of the agent. One man even tried burying his head in the leaves, but to no avail. Most fled from the cloud in a matter of seconds. For this test, the E-8s had been emplaced at the head and rear of the ambushed column outside the killing zone. It was thus concluded that E-8s so emplaced could effectively cover the target area and incapacitate the vast majority of the hostiles. Another test objective was to determine the effectiveness of the E-8 system in countering a daylight ambush of a friendly motor column. E-8 systems were pre-emplaced in the rear of the lead, trail, and middle trucks of the column. Test evaluators concluded that such pre-emplacement may cut reaction time to the ambush, and when utilized in conjunction with other counter-ambush measures employed by a motorized column, the E-8 system is an effective backup weapon. The test showed that the E-8s were able to cover the majority of the target area and its periphery, and incapacitate the majority of the hostile force. However, the initial response time of the system, from initial ambush fire to cloud buildup, approximately 25 seconds, is such that it will not defeat the initial volume of ambush fire by itself. The final test in the series was to evaluate the effectiveness of the E-8 munition system in offensive operations against hostile defensive field positions. The hostiles were located in hastily constructed defensive positions on a wooded rise. Outposts had been set up 100 meters in front of the main force. The friendly platoon moved to within 150 meters of the hostile position and formed an assault line. 3 E-8 systems were emplaced so as to provide interlacing fields of fire, and fired. It was hoped that the agent cloud would minimize the hazards to the assault force and would increase the possibility of taking prisoners. In this test, the munition completely covered the target area and cause the majority of the hostiles to be incapacitated or tactically ineffective. Troop Test Water Bucket 2 showed conclusively that munition systems E8, E158, and E159 offer significant tactical advantages when employed in counterinsurgency operations. The test series also pointed up several limitations on the use of these weapons. First, aerial delivery on several targets was inaccurate, indicating the need for improved bombing techniques and additional training using the tables currently available. And secondly, the submunitions in the systems tested tend to act as incendiaries when they come in contact with dry materials such as thatch or grass. The Water Bucket 2 tests also resulted in development of the following operational guidance for future employment of the systems tested. 1. Adequate peripheral coverage. Sufficient munition should be employed to completely cover the periphery of the target, ensuring denial of escape routes and achieving thorough coverage of the outer edge of the target. 2. Employment in depth. Sufficient munition should be employed against moving targets to thoroughly blanket the area of possible movement. And 3. Discriminate employment. The use of reserve munition should be taken into consideration to compensate for wind drift of the agent cloud and to permit the attacking of targets of opportunity.
Based. All right, so you might think like, wait, why did you show me a bunch of stuff about like psychedelic military experiments in the middle of a video about islands? You know, it's not like the islands were places for military experiments, were they? Well, let's go back again. Where are my nice pages? Okay, so if you start to look into billionaires taking over Hawaii, and you say, why are these billionaires moving to Hawaii? This is it all starts to pull apart. You have this great place where you have volcanoes, free energy, you know, and these new islands being formed all the time, and it's the perfect place to build your society. However, in order to do that, you need to have a certain amount of legal precedent. And legal precedent, so let's go into legal precedent. First off, French nuclear tests, Pacific fallout, and Tahiti, all around French Polynesia, you start to find these examples of islands that they've forced people out of because they did nuclear tests and you just can't live there anymore. And so they've had to consume entire populations and put them, assimilate them into new islands, or rather older islands, bigger islands that have room, and consolidate Polynesian island groups, which for a period of time, granted they had these islands and they stayed on these islands kind of, but no, they're nomadic. And so Polynesians would go from one island to another. And it's not that complicated. You know, when someone asked earlier if this is a comedy, I think it's funny, but genetics are no joke. You can quickly follow your haplotypes and you can say, wait a second, how is it that haplotype H is so spread out? You know, what's up with haplotype H? And why is it that in China to the, you know, Guam, you start to see these examples out of Malaysia and Indonesia from what we used to call Zealand, right? So lost continent, found after 300 years. This is the missing continent that, you know, everyone has been talking about for centuries, right? But they've been finally able to show in National Geographic, BBC, everywhere else, using LiDAR scanning that there actually really is, outside of New Zealand, an old Zealand that was a bigger continent that would have connected these people. Of course, these are the pictures that we have that in the old days we were talking about giants and dwarves and everything in the earlier videos because of the symmetry of these sizes. And you can say what you want about that, but it is interesting. Their heads have very strange haircuts, and these are very specific looking people. Say what you want. This whole area used to be a continent, okay? And it actually still is. And we don't even really think about how islands are rising and falling all the time. China creating new islands, South China Sea. You know, and this is just all kinds of other places. And I just saw a thing on the last page that said, when will the next supercontinent form, because people already expect it. But these are islands that are being made through technology. And if you just attach yourself to a volcano and imagine what volcanoes are doing, it's very similar to what these machines are doing. They're taking geothermal energy, they're pulling sand up, they're connecting, blowing up ships connected to coral reefs, filling the coral reefs in with sand, and then and they make these islands. This is a great GIF, actually. Here you go. 2014, August, through the year, a year later, literally, not even a year later, by May, So they can build an island, and this is happening a lot. But islands can form on their own, and the main thing with an island, though, is once you got an island, then you can defend your island. And these are these boats that are pulling sand up and building these islands. So if you need an island, you gotta get an island. But if you don't, if you can find an island that's already there, that's why Hawaii is. Let me go back. I'm sorry. That's why Hawaii is so important, because you've got all these areas here, and then you've got the West. Let me show a better map. Hold on. I got a satellite map right here. Don't need the South China Sea. Just need a map. Okay. Boom, 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 boom. Zooming out of the world. Look at how big the world is. Okay, so here's Hawaii in the middle, and you've got these, underwater land bridges right here. Here's a land bridge that's underwater here. Here's this strait of islands here. But you see there's a lot of other stuff going on. Japan's not far. The Philippines are even closer. Australia. A lot of these places also, if you think about how current works, if you're in South America, for instance, if you've gone around South America, you're pulled towards Hawaii. Unless you are very careful to follow the Peruvian coast up through Panama, you get pulled out west by natural winds, and then pulled so far west you're east. So Hawaii becomes a very important place because it's right in between this trade zone. It's like the Atlantic island, the Atlantis island kind of vibe. And there's a few other examples of that over here, right? You can find Bermuda, for instance, over there. And there's the Antilles and things. But for the Pacific, Hawaii is very important. And I'm not the first to suggest some of these ideas that Hawaii's culture is somewhat fabricated. Granted, there's a lot of other things that have happened since then. Let me pull up, for instance, the Hawaiian language. Wait, let me go back. First, list of Hawaiian monarchs. When does the Hawaiian Kingdom start? Well, the ancient Hawaiian Kingdom starts in 1795. So after 1776, after 1791, after the United States, a lot. After Haiti, after it all. Okay, so it's important to remember that Haiti is already existing. There's already a Haitian royal family that's been dealing with the Polynesian Islanders. And Polynesian Islanders have been traveling around. And Captain Cook, again, we said it before, but because some people were late, I just want to point this out again. Aloha Oi was written by supposedly the queen, the princess, Liliua, whatever. This isn't true. Like, if you go deeper down, you just type in Croatia, you'll see that the melody really is a Croatian song. I'd play it, but I'm worried I'd get some sort of a weird copyright block, so maybe I have to do like a MIDI remix of City Mara, which is about Mary sitting on a stone well. Now, if you can't tell, that's a biblical or even Muslim story, and that's something that we're going to have to talk more about the Bosniaks another day, because it just connects back, though, this idea that Bosniates, let me see here. Bosniaks, maybe it'll say. Bosniak. That'll work. So, Bosniak, ethnic group of Herzegovina with connections to Indonesia and haplotype H. Balkans that had been somewhat, there's a lot of them killed off, 2 million killed off, and a number of other Croatians were killed off as well. If you think about millions of people dying, it does change your genetic outlook on what people exist. So there's only so much that we can really tell you about the genetic haplotypes. But when you start to look at it and you see where Croatians have spread, it makes a lot of sense that they were on boats, and taking boats, they got a lot of places. And so we also know that the Moors had, Ottomans and Moors were working together, and so Bosniaks were all over the world. So this is a big beginning to that story. And then Captain Cook, who was British, but he did have a Slavic parenting. I forget the whole background of Captain Cook. Let me see if I can get down here early. Yorkshire, there's something there though, where he's got Slavic background. I don't know if Wikipedia is going to tell you about his parents exactly. Scottish farm laborer, and his wife Grace Paci, right? So from Thornby-on-Tees. I think that's the one. She was related to. She's Slavic. So then he's got his naval career. He takes his boat. He gets a Croatian and Ottoman crew, and he goes around the South Pacific. And when he finally gets there, I think it's the Endeavor. Is it the Endeavor that gets there? They meet a bunch of different Polynesian island people, and there's a lot of Polynesian islands that have a bunch of different cultures, and that's kind of the point. The Hawaiian language, when you start to say, oh yeah, it's definitely its own language. Well, okay. I mean, it's got things that are its own, but it's a new language that's existed for a couple centuries. And the further back you go, you see that it was very quickly churned out by sailors who had been part of not just Cook's crew, but a number of other crews like Conrad Lauder had talked about, and Mortimer had a number of Polynesians, and they'd brought Polynesians with them who knew the islands well. And this is a way that they started to establish the communities that took over Hawaii. Now, there were people living on Hawaii. How many of them are left from 10,000 years ago, though? That's the thing. Things have been completely changed. So we have these stories of islanders arriving in places because we don't have the evidence we want to have for people that were there even further back. And there are some interesting connections we can find linguistically. For instance, Tahiti was originally called Uiti, I think. Is that right? Where's Tahiti at? Ohuiti, right? Ohuiti, Otahiti. So Otahiti. So that's something kind of more of a Scandinavian aspect that was added, or a Slavic aspect that was added right there. The Uta for the ta, and sort of Pata, or even, which is in Egyptian, Pata. And so we look at Austronesian, and we see these examples of reusages of the old language being put back in. And so basically, Polynesian member of the Austronesian language, closely related to Samoan, a lot of Samoans and Tongans that were brought to Hawaii. And the Marquesian colonized the archipelago about 300 AD. So this is our story where we say, okay, who do we know who's been to these islands, who's been going back and forth, and they got the Marquesans, and they've been doing the Haka dance. And this is what we consider to be the indigenous Hawaiian person, when really they're a naval people that went around the world and were on all of these different islands, and including places near India, places in the Caribbean, places that are on the island side of Brazil, for instance. So across the Panama Canal, which in other words means that there was another Panama Canal before the Panama Canal, which we found evidence that it was dammed up and replaced, and for about 100 years was silted. So there definitely were cultures that existed, and the Tahitian culture is very real. But you can see the influence of Europeans today, of course, the French culture that's taken over Tahiti. But some of the people that made up the Hawaiian culture. All right, now also going to show you kind of an interesting thing I read at one point. I think I had a better version of this. Maybe this was I forget, because I think I was on like a bus in Brazil or Bolivia, and I found this article, and I don't know if this is the one because it has a lot of the same data, but I feel like it's missing some stuff. And it talks a lot about tourism in Hawaii from 1776 to 2076 and the future of Hawaiian tourism and how we're going to have to, etc., take care of Hawaii. And he goes into how strange Hawaii really is and how there isn't a lot of stuff there since before 1880s and 1930s, particularly 1970s, because there's been storms, earthquakes, but really there just wasn't a lot there. And extrapolating from the past, what do we really know about Hawaiian culture? Because we know today we have a Hawaiian culture. We have a group of islanders who've been there for centuries. I mean, if you live in a place for centuries, it's going to establish a culture. And whatever you came with will be cemented into a new culture, right? So imagine we're amongst the people gathered in Hawaii in 1776, whoever we would be and whatever we would be doing. And we wouldn't be worried too much about the future of tourism, right? Neither would be discussing the ridiculous possibility that our way of life, 1 million strong and secure after 2,000 years of spectacular growth and development, was about to come to an abrupt end with the arrival on our shores of Captain Cook and friends in a few years. Now let's imagine 150 years ago. The population of the island is now down to only 80,000 people, no tourists, though in fact a kind of tourism is only a decade away, with the first specifically tourist accommodations being built in 1860s. Okay, again with the 1860s, Civil War times, and just for a little bit more, a little context, in 1849, the U.S. signs a treaty with the Hawaiian Islands, which are, imagined as a majesty, a kingdom since 1799. So for centuries, in order to establish themselves, they're following this monarchical system that the Europeans are demanding in order to respect maritime sovereignty. And then the U.S. comes along and says, okay, well, we don't have a monarchy, so we're still an independent contracting company like the Virginia Company. We would like to make a trade treaty with Hawaii so as we can use the islands as a jumping point between the United States and Asia and make it very easy for us to trade with Shanghai, Tatarstan, Tartar City, and Macau. So the contracts went on that the United States would be paying Hawaii huge amount, millions of dollars, really, in order to use them as a post office shipping port. And this, in the 1849 period, this is the beginning of what leads to the effort to take over Hawaii by establishing their culture as a, and there's already by 1799 the first generation's beginning of this idea, but this is how they're trying to circumvent nobility by circumventing the culture by creating a tourist culture. And you can see, this happens over the next 20 to 30 years. Advertising Hawaii on the mainland begins. 1914, world's first scheduled commercial flight between Tampa and St. Petersburg. 80 years ago, 1934, about 350,000 airplane tickets were sold worldwide. Tourism still arriving Hawaii was common by steamship. And then in 1935, the first Pan Am Clipper would begin to San Francisco. So people start connecting to this place more and more. But let's go, where does it talk about Mark Twain, Mark Twain. So Mark Twain wrote a paper about his trip to Hawaii, his travels. I don't know if do I have the Hawaii Mark Twain? And you can find basically he was sent there when it cost $350 at the time. It would have been worth $6,000 to $8,000 really, the trip to go to Hawaii. And by 1905, people were taking week-long trips on steamboats because of this book that Mark Twain wrote, letters from Hawaii particularly. And he tells his story about this crazy culture that exists. And again, it's Mark Twain, so you got to imagine he's embellishing somewhat, but he's just completely fascinated because you've got a place with the craziest flowers and it has this real paradisical vibe. And all of a sudden he starts fulfilling, granted, someone associated with the world fairs, he's thinking about this new Hawaiian culture and what it's going to mean to all these people, these volcano god cultures and everything. Not to say that there aren't already stories to draw upon, but these stories are being solidified here at this period in the 1860s into the 1880s. So the world transformed. Let me see. There's definitely Twain. He should tell you more. What about dollars? How about that? Okay. 1935. An airplane ticket, $360 was about $6,000 in 2014 dollars. Okay, so the costs also, the elite that are going there. I wish this was the article. That would have really helped. Hawaii First Hotel. Maybe I could just find it myself. Look back at the earliest hotels in Hawaii, and you can see some. Do they have any like drawings of them from the 1860s? So there you go. You start looking at opened in 1901, the Moana. So many of these huge buildings that were designed that had this Victorian feel that were saying, hey, we're going to turn this into a tourist destination spot, right? We're going to make this a place where you can learn about indigenous culture. And this very quickly became the Americana. America associated itself more and more out of less and less with Native Americans from America, from the United States, but more and more with Hawaiian culture. And Hawaii mania takes over in the United States in the 50s, and everyone's obsessed with Tahitian figurines and dolls. But these are all very Victorian buildings that are installed. And I'm trying to find the oldest ones. Here's the old hotel, opened in 1902, brick buildings. There's another great one, though, and it was burned down in just crazy painting, 1860. Waikiki. Yeah, when you start looking at some of the old pictures of what Hawaii used to look like and how it's been filled in, and even the kinds of palm trees that grow there, and we created this amazing cultural story that in Hawaii, the islanders who've lived there forever since the Garden of Eden, they've never known sin. They don't need to wear clothes. They never need to work because the world's perfect, right? In Hawaii, let me see, like. Future fruit scene just to tie it together. And in this other world that the Hawaiians have lived in forever, right? That they never have to work, and food just grows magically everywhere. Everything's perfect, and there's nothing to worry about. And when asked about more important things like maths and sciences, it gets a little bit more cloudy, because you can find for sure astronomy and records of Hawaiian astronomy connecting to sailing and sailors that have charted the seas from Tahiti. But then beyond that, it's not so part of their culture to be aware of the storms and floods and seasons. They just have this like awe moment where you go and watch the beach, right? The Black Flag Day, where you just watch for tsunamis and you just try to be respectful of the ocean. But all these things come back to sailor stories. It's the idea of the Polynesian sailor, this culture that existed across the South Pacific that had all of the things we keep telling ourselves were Hawaiian, right? But this is all, this is a much bigger culture. Hawaii is a single outpost, a furthest outpost from Tahiti and from Polynesia. So I thought that would be the main thing I wanted to start to explain about Hawaii, is that half of the culture was created in 1799. And you can see the list of royal monarchs. This is Kamehameha, right? The Great. Well, how about looking for his family? It says like the niece of Alapanui, the usurping ruler of Hawaii. And you go back further and further. I'll up a title. The nobility Ali. Okay? So Alis. So what do we know? What are Alis again, right? So Ali, Quran. Let me see. Aliism. Let's see. Aliism. Well, 12er Shiism, which is to believe in the Alis. Okay, so it's interesting because it takes us right back to this idea of the 12 tribes, the 12 Shias, and even the idea of the 12 Alis, the 12 nobles that make up the Hawaiian ruling family, which are following the exact same. I mean, it's interesting to follow the exact same structure at very least. And let's go a little deeper and say, okay, what about the different ranks and how are these things designed? Well, you have full blood ranks, half blood ranks, and by marriage ranks, all things that are almost identical to the rules in Leviticus that they have to follow. So it's very interesting that they're following all the same rules. It could just be a natural, logical thing that I think Charles Dawkins might call this a selfish gene, but that's another very interesting thing. And then all Hawaiian monarchs after Kamehameha III were the children of Kakuiali fathers who married high-ranking wives. So that's something that's exactly the same thing that's going on in the House of Saudi Arabia. The exact same system where you have multiple wives, and then each high-ranking wife's son is the next consistent ruler going through. And when you get into some of these other places, it's even more weird because you're like, okay, well, if Hawaiian culture comes from this Polynesian empire that maybe after flooding has kind of been wiped out, well, what's going on in the Tonga, right? What's going on in Tahiti? And then you immediately will notice their logos and start to say, okay, well, these are royal British style logos with this crusader hexagonal Star of David, but with the red cross of Switzerland and Sweden. I mean, it's very Swiss. And you've got so many of these examples of again, why are these the people that the British royal family respect in order to take over the culture? And going through, it's just more and more impressive that they were able to get. So who's George Tapo? George Tapo, named after King George III of the United Kingdom, right? George Tapo. So originally COC or Jiaoji, right? So interesting. And Iron Cable. His nickname was Iron Cable. So born in Tonga around 1797. Often quoted birthday is December 4th, but who's to say? Let's see here. Is this him with a snake? Oh. So he was established as the king before the death of his father in 1820. He inherited the conflicts with the overlords of Tonga Tapu, and eventually, I think he made deals with the British government. Is that right? Or was it the French government? He made deals with the French government, and that ensured the continuity of the monarchy in Tonga. And so the Tongan Empire, and you can see this is the king of the tomb of King George Tapu with the lion and this crazy Ethiopian looking. I mean, it's a little too much. A little more there than just. That's not exactly what you think of when you think of Hawaiian or Tahiti. This is more Ethiopian, right? And even just to remind you, like, what did he look like? Well, he kind of looks Ethiopian. He does. I'm not saying he necessarily wasn't. But what does it mean to be from an island if obviously everyone landed on that island at some point? So we have to start to question what we understand about genetics and recognize that a lot of these people are coming from sailors that have come to these different places. All right. Let me pull up also a list of monarchs in Joaquinin. And let's see, I don't think you're going to find a picture. But from 1760 to 1790, and then disposed during a civil war. There's a couple of these. And they're all these heiresses, right? Born in 1775, had both brothers. His father was Mato. I don't know. Not sure what to tell you about Tonga, but it's an interesting culture that is on the antipod of the Tamanrasset River, right? And that was something we found. Let me just Tamanrasset. A large volcanic eruption on 2022, January 15th, the Pacific island nation of Tonga created a planetary shockwave that circled the Earth at least 3 times over several days. The antipod of pressure was in the Tamanrasset. So the antipod of the pressure was in the Tamanrasset, which is the river system of Africa. So I don't know. I mean, it's not exactly, but it's kind of interesting, the connection there between the Tamanrasset river system and Tonga and these people that kind of look like, whatever you think of Egyptians or Polynesians, there seems to be more of a connection when we look at the haplotype H. Type H. Let me just pull up haplotype H. And this is the thing, the DNA evidence is the hardest to argue with. You start finding evidence in Southwest Asia, out of the Southern Caucasus. And this is very interesting because that means when you find blue-eyed haplotype H, or you find these blonde people, especially that you think of as coming from Scandinavia, if they really came from Near East Asia and South Caucasus, it also explains why the same areas are spreading out with same kind of similar, looks or culture or beliefs, mythology, even language, out from haplotype H. And we see a huge spot in this part of Africa, but it's the closest to the coast. And that's an interesting thing when we think about the Mega Chad, the Mega Congo, that this could have been an into Africa theory. I know this is something that not everyone loves, but the idea that
out of a flood, you have people emerging into important places and then spreading to new locations. And haplotype H kind of proves this, that they got all the way to Indonesia, just everywhere around the world. The fastest and easiest way to do that when these places aren't connected is through water travel. So that's kind of interesting to me, is that we can kind of use the haplotype H to prove the spread of people into Africa and across the world. Now, a couple more examples, maybe. Afro-Asiatic homeland. Here's a hypothetical place where speakers of the Proto-Afro-Asiatic language lived in a single linguistic community. And they talk about this idea that what if this whole area here, at some point you've got the Tuaregs and all of Africa was, but you have to remember from our map of the Mega Uganda. Well, this actually looks like it's already open somewhere. Let it load. You have the Mega Congo and Mega Chad. That these locate. Did I just really? Where'd that go? Hold on. Afro-Asiatic homeland. There we go. Okay. So you compare the places and you see, okay, what's this in the middle here? That's just nothing. Well, of course there's nothing, because it's the lake. Same here. So these are all areas that spread in and started to communicate with each other and did develop cultures. A lot of these developed their cultures in Africa for sure, but they had cultures that had to arrive here at some point from the deluge coming in. And as land starts to dry up, then they are more and more isolated, except for those that continued on doing their water trade pattern and just continued moving further and further, island to island, hopping from Madagascar, which, our haplotype I will show, and haplotype K shows that they traveled to Madagascar and into Indonesia. Okay, so Hawaiian Island, raised in the courts. There's a prophecy. Where's the prophecy? Okay. Kingship was inherited by his son, given a prominent religious position as guardian of the Hawaiian gods of war. He was also given control of the district of Waiupu Valley. The two cousins' relationship was strained after Kamehameha made a dedication to the gods instead of allowing Kiwalao to do that. Okay, so is that not your identical Jacob story? I don't know. Jacob's ladder. Kamehameha accepted the allegiance of a group of chiefs from the Kona district. The other story takes place after the prophecy was passed along by the high priest and priestess and high chief and chieftesses. When Kamehameha was able to lift the Naha stone, he was considered the fulfiller of the prophecy. Other ruling chiefs, Kiawe, Mahuli, and Maho, twins Kaoa, and the other chiefs rejected the prophecy of Pokahi. The high chiefs of Kauai supported Kawalaos, even after learning about the prophecy. Where's this prophecy again? The prophecy included far more than Hawaiian Island. It went across and beyond the Pacific Island to the semi-continents of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and that must be the Maori name for New Zealand. So there's your other connection. But this is another thing. When did the Maori get to New Zealand? Maybe 1840. They're saying this is what they created the word, so I don't know. No. I think it's like 600 years, 200 years before Europeans got there is the story, that the Maori had just got there themselves, because it had been like a giant bird island, and for the most part, if they had been there earlier, those birds would have been killed off earlier, and that's kind of our best way of guessing if they, how they had lasted that long. Okay, so 1789. Fur trading vessel Eleanor with his son was captured. Thomas Humphrey Metcalf captained the ship Fair American along the northwest coast. They were to rendezvous in what is known as the Sandwich Islands. Fair America was held up when it was captured by the Spanish and then quickly released in San Blas. The Eleanor arrived in 1790, where it was greeted by the chief Kamenooku. The chief did something that the captain took offense to, and Metcalf struck the chief with a rope's end. Sometime later, while docked in Honolulu, Maui, a small boat tied to the ship was stolen by native townspeople with a crewman inside. When Metcalf discovered that the boat was taken, he sailed directly to the village of Oahu. There, he confirmed that the boat had been broken apart and the man killed. He had already fired muskets in the previous village where he was anchored, killing some residents. Metcalf now took aim at Oahu. He had all cannons moved to one side of the ship and began his trading call out to the locals. Hundreds of people came to the beach to trade canoes to trading canoes were launched. When they were within firing range, the ship fired on the Hawaiians, killing over 100. 6 weeks later, a fair American was struck near the Kona coast of Hawaii, where the chief kame Eawamoku was living. Near whatever he had decided to attack the next foreign ship to avenge the strike by the elder Metcalf. He canoed out to the ship with his men, where he killed Metcalf's son and all but one, Isaac Davis, of the 5 crewmen. Kamehameha took Davis into protection and took possession of the ship. Eleanor was at the time anchored at Kalakakua Bay, where the ship's boatswain had gone ashore and been captured. So basically this is the beginning of like these minor wars with these pirates trying to take over, and this is where the royal family starts to emerge. All right, well, let me see. Stellium's got a thing he's sending really quickly. Stellium says, "Have you not seen my disclosure on Andreas Exer's channel? Have you not seen my disclosure? Which one? Which one are you talking about, man? Are you talking about Are you talking about the Prince video? Prince hacking video? Okay. Hack the planet. Agreed. Memory man. Well, I gotta go deal with a boat and take care of some stuff. So I think what we'll do is we'll continue this tomorrow, because the days are just getting so nice outside. So thank you guys. I hope you learned a little bit about Hawaii, and talk to you soon.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.